Hello and welcome to Season 4, Episode 24 of Logicast, the AWS News Podcast brought to you by Logicata. I'm Carl Robinson, CEO and co-founder of Logicata, and I'm joined, as I'm sure you've all come to expect by now, by lead cloud engineer, John, as always. Goodall, how are you doing today, John?
Oh, full of Swedish meatballs, so no complaints.
Have you been to IKEA, or
Oh, yes,
IKEA, as they
I
pronounce
have
it?
been to IKEA. I have been there, yes.
Yeah.
I was up there
Hmm.
yesterday, looking at some new furniture and obviously coming back with several kilos of meatballs.
Of course, and I assume you consumed some on the premises as well, because they always taste
Yes,
better there. Yeah, very good.
yes. And honestly, for the four of us, for £30 or something, for four full plates of food and cake and stuff afterwards, you can't complain.
Yes, but it's quite a long way to go for that
I
value
mean,
family meal.
yeah, I wouldn't make the trek into Croydon just for a 30 quid lunch, let's be honest.
That's a bit of a false economy. Anyway, we're not here to talk about meatballs and flat pack furniture. We are here to talk about AWS news, and we are joined today by a very special guest, Randall Hunt, CTO of Calent. How are you doing today, Randall?
Doing well. How are you guys?
Good. Are you a fan of the IKEA meatballs and flat pack furniture yourself?
I'm a pretty big fan of IKEA meatballs, and used to take the ferry to Brooklyn and Red Hook in New York to go and get some furniture from there and some meatballs along the way.
Nice. So I'm confused. Can you actually take your car on the ferry, or are you carrying the flat pack furniture back on the ferry?
You carry it back on the ferry, or you
Wow,
get it
that's
delivered.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, that would be a better option. Yeah, I can't imagine that taking flat pack furniture on a ferry as a foot passenger is a very easy thing to do.
It's one passenger and a Billy bookcase. Thanks.
Unless if they let you take the trolley, then you'd be okay. You could wheel it on, I suppose. But anyway, we digress. Randall, tell us a little bit about what you do for a living at Calent.
Calent, we're an all-in on AWS premier tier consulting partner. All that means is we build stuff for people. So people come to us with ideas, and they're like, "Hey, how do I build this in AWS?" And then we go and we do it. We build it, and that can be anyone from super large enterprises to small scale startups and everything in between, a lot of small businesses. My role as CTO is to kind of look at the strategic trajectory and the vision and all those corporate nonsense words that mean nothing, the corporate mumbo jumbo. What I really do is I'm the cloud janitor. So I keep everything running smoothly in our AWS accounts. And I think people don't appreciate the complexity of doing that as a consulting partner, because we are always dealing with brand new services that may not already have CloudTrail or something tagging even enabled. So figuring out who created a resource in a specific account and making sure it's mapped to them and that we know what it's spending is actually surprisingly difficult. You can get in 70 to 90% of the way there with just default CloudTrail and everything, but a lot of the newer services just don't have the auditability, which makes it very difficult sometimes.
So enter the janitor. And I don't know why the word janitor always seems to invoke memories of Scooby-Doo for me. I'm not going to do a Scooby-Doo impression into the mic, but wasn't it always the janitor that did it? Or am I getting confused?
If it weren't for those rotten kids.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, on that note, we have digressed a lot already just in today's introductions. But as regular listeners to the podcast will know, we're not here to talk about meatballs, flat pack furniture, or 1970s American cartoons. We are here to talk about AWS news. And once a week, I curate a list of AWS news, which I share via my weekly AWS News Roundup newsletter. And then John picks a selection of the articles that we would like to talk about with our guests. So we have, of course, shared such a selection of articles with Randall that we'd like to talk about. And the first of those articles is actually a pair of articles. I'm sure John is trying to throw me now by doing this, throwing in pairs of articles. But the first one's not so much of an article, more of a feature announcement, all about AWS Key Management Service launching on-demand key rotation for imported keys. And the second article in the pair is really going on to explain how you might do that. So, John, thoughts on this one, why you picked it? Are you excited about it, or is it just...
I mean, excited is probably the wrong term, because I don't get excited about encryption keys. I think I know some people that might, but I don't get excited about encryption keys, let's be honest here. And no, I'm not picking pairs of them to throw you. In this case, it's so the show notes make sense, because the first one, as he says, a feature announcement, it's like 3 whole paragraphs saying, here's a thing you can do. And the second one kind of goes on to explain it. So I'm going to kind of talk through the second one more than the first. But the short version is, up until reasonably recently, when this came out, sort of last week, sometime week before, When you brought your own key material to a KMS key, you could do that, right? When you stand up a KMS key, you can either say, AWS, provide me with some key material, please, and they host them in their own HSMs, and that kind of all works like that. Or you can say, here's my key material, upload that, and then they're going to create the key off of the back of that. If you've done that for whatever reason, because you needed to, because you don't trust AWS or whatever policy that you have, you could never rotate that key. Okay. And key rotation within KMS is the best quality of life feature ever because the ARN stays the same. You just go, it's a new key now. And they're all backwards compatible. The new one can decrypt all the old stuff, which means you don't have to worry about re-encrypting stuff. And it makes your life a whole hell of a lot easier if ever you need to rotate your keys, which you should do regularly anyway. And you need to do in case of breaches and what have you. So in-place rotation is the best quality of life feature ever. But if you brought your own key material, you couldn't do it, which really, really sucked. I've never had to deal with it, but just, theoretically, it would really, really suck because what you'd have to do is every single place you'd use that key, and granted, it should only be a small number of them, but it could be quite a few, and it could probably be in production services. You would have to change the ARN of the key. You'd have to make sure that anything else that was encrypted with it would work with it, and it was just really painful. Now, what you can do is you can upload additional key material to that key and say, now rotate to my new material, please. So you're still bringing your own material, which still meets whatever policy you have that requires you to do that. And I've never really met anybody that could articulate why they had to do this, just as an aside, but some people do. And you upload that to the existing key and you rotate the key and the ARN stays the same and everything works as it did before. Brilliant. So now you've got this really nice quality of life feature that you didn't have, but now you do if you're in this particular subset of users of KMS. So yeah, I like this. Excited is the wrong word, but it's a nice feature for those that need it.
Well, you definitely sounded enthusiastic, if not excited.
Enthused.
But, yeah. Randall, are you as enthusiastic about this new feature as John?
Yeah, I think it's great. I think the multi-region key exclusion and the HMAC exclusion and the asymmetric keys exclusion is fine. That doesn't really, change too much for anyone. But the thing I'm trying to figure out at the moment is the pricing. So why is it that the first two rotations add $1 per month in additional charges, but then it's capped after the second rotation? That is a very strange pricing model that I don't fully understand.
Yeah, I don't know. Anything to add on that, John?
I don't know. I'd have to really dig into the bowels of things that I'm not allowed to see, I suspect. I suspect it's something to do with the number of HSMs or whatever that they've got backing these keys, and they will probably start reusing them after a while because you can actually, use your own cloud HSM and do a lot of this yourself if you really feel that way inclined. And the only reason I know that is because it's on the SA Pro exam. Like I've never ever had to do it. That's the only reason I know you can do it. But I suspect it's because of the number of HSMs and they're kind of capping that to sort of 3 backing your custom key material, I think, so that you can only go a certain number of them back, which means in theory, the backwards compatibility is limited to that number of rotations because they've got to store it somewhere. That's the theory, but that's just a theory.
Well, I guess we could always put that question to Jeremy and Vipul, who wrote the article, see if John is correct or not in that assumption. But on that note, let's move along to our second article for this week. This is an article from the Networking and Content Delivery blog, all about the introduction of new application layer 7 DDoS protection for AWS Web Application Firewall and AWS Shield Advanced customers. So, Randall, I know this is an area that you were interested in talking about, and what are your thoughts on this? You mentioned in our preamble that there's quite a bit of complexity around this. So I'm keen to hear your opinions.
Yeah, I don't know if you also saw that Amplify recently added WAF as an option, so you can throw that in front of Amplify hosting now. I don't think people fully grok how difficult it is to do DDoS defense at layer 7. There's especially with HP3, which kind of blends the networking levels because you're going through UDP as a transport protocol. You've got, or QUIC, I guess is what they call it, which blends like DNS and TLS and your HP protocol. It gets really complicated because they're trying to minimize the number of network round trips at a protocol level. But the downside of that is that there's fewer identifiers to say, oh, this is probably part of a DDoS. And you have these things like replay attacks where you can get broken devices to repeat packets and resend them indefinitely. And so protecting against this is very difficult. And, this is, the fact that they continue to iterate on this and make it better and better is very interesting. And I think, the rules, the Amazon managed rules that they launched for this, it supposedly auto learns your normal traffic pattern in like 15 minutes flat. Um, I could believe that as long as your traffic patterns existed within that 15-minute pattern block. If not, I'm a little curious to see how they would actually go about doing that. But they do supposedly leverage like previous web history and learnings from all of the models that they've trained here. And I would be curious to know what the backing machine learning model is and how it's able to run so quickly. And yeah, I mean, that's sort of my thoughts on it.
John?
Yeah, no notes. The thing that I thought about when I read this was that, you might remember, was that rapid reset attack that kind of hit various players on the internet, and AWS ate quite a lot of it, and Cloudflare ate quite a lot of it. We had a customer that was affected by it, and they ended up solving that through things like captures and what have you. And then people just sort of got bored. It wasn't being eaten by the WAF as such. It was the WAF hosting the capture, but it was human intervention. And I just wonder if this sort of thing is a reaction to, and then they say it, to be fair, is a reaction to these kind of newer styles where they're not kind of flooding at the lower levels. They're doing full sort of top level requests. So it's good. We like to see innovation and improvements in these services. We like to recommend WAF because it's really easy. You just sort of turn it on. Here's some managed rules, bish bash bosh. And it's not perfect, but it's, for what it is, it's really good, and it's cost effective, and it integrates really nicely with a lot of things. And particularly if you integrate it with CloudFront, you're protected at the edge, and you can get discounts on your usage as well if you bundle it up with CloudFront savings plans. And it's just a nice service to use. So anything that makes this more kind of usable and approachable and just generally better for folk that then aren't going and looking at third-party tools, yeah, I'm all for it.
And I'm guessing it's... Oh, sorry, go on, Randall.
I'm a little curious. They say in this post that there's no charges for attack traffic flagged as DDoS. Was that always part of WAF, or was that just part
No,
of
that's
Shield
new.
earlier?
That's
Okay.
new. That's reasonably new, I think, because I remember from this rapid reset that the client had a several £1,000 bill as a result of all the captures and all the traffic and all the rest of it.
Now that's a very nice addition. That's a bit of a game changer. It makes WAF way more palatable. The extra cost of it.
So I was just going to ask the question. The title says that these new protections have been introduced for AWS WAF and AWS Shield Advanced customers. Are they available? Is that independently of one another? They're available to WAF customers and/or Shield Advanced customers, or do you need both to benefit from these new protections?
You need WAF to have Shield Advanced, so it's kind of one of those things, right? If you have WAF,
but you don't need Shield Advanced to have WAF.
No. So you get Shield Standard when you have WAF attached to CloudFront, and then Shield Advanced you can pay more, $3,000 a month or something. And then basically the way I viewed that was you got a response team sitting behind the curtain, as it were, but you had to have Shield Standard in order to qualify for Shield Advanced, even though you could pay for it regardless of what your setup was, which I thought was a bit mad, because the first thing they tell you to do is, it's not right. So yeah, I think it's because it's built into WAF and they're just name dropping the Shield Advanced name, I think, because people don't necessarily view them as these linked services when in truth they really are.
Anything to add on that, Randall?
No, the more I learn about it, the more I like it. It's a great launch.
Awesome. Well, on that note, let's move along to our next article for this week. And this one is, again, a feature announcement, I think. Yes, it is a feature announcement where AWS CloudTrail has enhanced logging for Amazon S3 Delete Objects API. So I'm going to come to you first again on this one, Randall, because I know this is one that you were interested in sharing an opinion on. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting behavior that comes to light, and this is not so much about this particular launch as much as it is about CloudTrail and S3 objects and the complexity with getting that logging right. Delete object APIs calls and just overall events for like bulk work can blow up your CloudTrail costs. So we've had customers in the past that have been using Athena as a query mechanism over a large number of files, and then before S3 table buckets, they would do their own indexing and compaction through various systems, and the amount of cost that you would see in CloudTrail, because there was some obscure blanket rule that had been created by like a legal team that said every CloudTrail access and every S3 access and every S3 delete and every S3 always has to be logged. It has to be logged in CloudTrail. So they'd end up spending more on CloudTrail than they would on their actual S3 bill, which was just absurd. So I like that this kind of provides a bulk delete request in a smaller event so that it only counts as one event, I assume. And then I like that it gives you the option of granularity. I hope they'll do this for all the other S3 object APIs going forward.
John, thoughts on this one?
I was amazed this didn't already exist. It's one of those things. I thought this already existed. And to be fair, it kind of did, but not really. So as the announcement says, previously, because there's two ways of deleting things in S3. There's a number of ways of deleting things, but there's delete object, singular, and that would tell you the thing that was deleted and who did it, and delete objects, plural. And that would just tell you who triggered it, what the bucket was, where they're from, their IP address, and all that kind of thing, but wouldn't tell you all of the things that they deleted. And to me, that means that log item was quite unvaluable. It was, oh, John deleted some things from that bucket, but we've got no idea what, because loads of stuff's gone missing. That's unhelpful. That's unhelpful. So unless you have bucket logging turned on directly, you kind of had no idea what was going on, right? And by and large, people don't turn on this bucket logging because of cost, because it's horrifically expensive at any kind of decent scale. So by and large, people didn't have it turned on, don't have it turned on. It's certainly not something that I turn on by default, even though, like, what is it, that best practices service that a trusted advisor that I get quite angry about, even though it tells you to turn it on. No, because it's too expensive under most use cases, so people just don't do it. And the thinking was, well, it's all in CloudTrail. Turns out it wasn't. Now it is, which is good. So yes, but I don't view this as this. Oh, this is amazing. They've closed a gap that shouldn't have been open. Well done. Do you want a sticker? Cool.
Isn't that the case with a lot of these announcements that we talk about, though?
we have this conversation regularly. Wasn't this already a thing? No, it wasn't. Now it is. Cool.
Or we have the opposite. Why isn't this a thing when there's an article explaining how to do something in AWS by building it in serverless, and big long article about how to build this thing. It's like, well, why don't you just build it for us, AWS? So we don't have to build it ourselves.
Know how.
Yeah, exactly. And I've never quite understood how that feedback loop works. Actually, I did try to ask some people at reInvent last year to say that if you put a post out there to say here's how to build a thing, do you then monitor how many people have built it to decide whether you need to build it yourselves or not? And the various people I spoke to said there doesn't seem to be a feedback mechanism loop like that that feeds back into AWS about how to prioritize these developments. I don't know.
If you see in some of the samples and reference architectures they release, there's like a stack ID that they use, and they do some analytics on that.
Okay, so they see how many people have deployed the stack. And
I think the issue, though, is that most of those things, while being very good references, do not survive production unmodified. So they're a jumping off point more than they are the thing that you deploy with no modification. And so I think there could be many more of these deployments in the wild than AWS is anticipating, because the stack is modified and whoever goes in is looking at the CloudFormation or the CDK and saying, oh, what's this like stack ID number? I'm going to delete that.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. I'd never thought about it from that perspective, but interesting insight. Let's move along to our next article for this week. And this one, you should be pleased, Randall, because it's about investment in US data center infrastructure. But actually, it's one of many announcements I've seen recently about investment in global data center infrastructure. And I'm wondering if AWS is trying to counter the press that came out recently about from the data center community about various data center AI projects being, AI data center projects being put on hold by a lot of the large cloud service providers, because I don't know. I mean, I monitor the news regularly, obviously, to produce the newsletter. This morning I saw, I think, 20,000 Australian dollars being invested in Brisbane and Melbourne, I think. And this particular one is all about
tenner, isn't it?
No,
20,000 Australian dollars, about 10 quid.
Yeah, no, they're about 3 to the pound, I think, aren't they? Something like that. But yeah, I don't know what they are to the US dollar. I can't do that mental maths that quickly whilst also trying to record a podcast. So, but yeah, this particular article is about Amazon's plans to invest $20 billion in Pennsylvania to expand the cloud infrastructure there. So, yeah, thoughts on this, John?
Yeah, I mean, much along your sorts of lines, because we saw some noise about it slowing down, and they cancelled one, and so on and so on and so on. And then you look at this, and it's on Monday they're going to invest $20 billion in Pennsylvania, and then comes less than a week after, as the article says, $10 billion in North Carolina and $5 billion in Taiwan, and I'm sure we've seen loads of others as well recently. 20,000 Australian dollars is not in. Okay, I'm being flippant, and I should be saying this with our next guest, but I'm being flippant with the exchange rates, but 20 grand Australian is a drop in the bucket compared to these sorts of numbers, because we've, between three things, we're at $35 billion in three different places. And then there's all the stuff about the nuclear reactors and the small modular ones and all that jazz as well. And there's so much money being poured into these things. It's astounding. Like, I'd like to even have the amount of money that they're investing in things, because I'd never work again. Like, my job would be pina colada, I think.
Even just the Australian investment, you'd be okay with it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that I couldn't retire on 20,000 Australian dollars, I'm afraid.
Well, the Australian one is 20 billion total, right?
Oh,
Australian dollars, yeah, but which is what I think it's about 9 billion US or something. I think.
I have no idea.
Yeah, yeah.
It's 9.6 British pounds, and it's Australian dollars. It is, hang on, 13.
Okay, so it's still quite it's significant sum. But,
yeah, I could retire on that. That'd be fine. I wouldn't start a rocket company or anything. That'd be fun.
Fun fact: Blue Origin actually started before SpaceX. People don't know that. Blue Origin is actually an older company than SpaceX is.
And what are they doing now? Because I haven't heard much about that. Is it still Project Kuiper?
Oh, they keeping quiet after sending pop stars to space and making a noise about it.
Yeah.
No, they're quietly building, and they're taking the turtle approach as opposed to the rabbit approach. You know, I think you've seen Musk has been, and I worked at SpaceX for a while, so I feel comfortable criticizing them, but throwing rocket after rocket. While I was in charge of the CI/CD team, we never blew up a rocket. I think that's a fun point.
Yeah. That's not something you want to be responsible for, I think.
What do they call it? Rapid unplanned disassembly, which is the most engineer term ever.
I like that they're investing additional capital into the US, of course, but the 10 billion in North Carolina is of interest to me. I'm originally from North Carolina, and then the Pennsylvania side, I'm curious if that just goes more towards like US East 2 or if it's US East 1. So is it gonna, I'm curious what all will happen there. And I think people often underestimate the complexity of deploying these networks at scale. I loved Peter DeSantis's talk from reInvent last year, where they really dive into, oh no, it wasn't last year. It was actually 2022, maybe, where they dive into how they splice these giant fibers and how they switch to a 400 gigabit Ethernet standard, and how they just are fiber standard, and the difficulty in building all of this. I mean, Amazon invests in trans-Pacific cables like the Waikiki cable. James Hamilton talked about that way back in 2018. And these are like multi-decade projects that, you know, end up getting investment from Meta and Microsoft and Amazon and everyone, and then they get sold off to some private equity firm somewhere.
So why do you think we're seeing so many of these announcements now? Any thoughts around that? Or?
I don't think it's so much a reaction to the news. I think they're trying to keep a steady state on their capital expenditures. And what did they do in Q1? They did, 25 billion. And then what are they doing now? 35 billion in Q2. So we'll probably see another 25 billion in Q3 and another 25 billion in Q4. The Stargate stuff, is a lot of posturing. They haven't broken ground or deployed a single server yet. Oracle's talking a big game about how they're building all the Stargate servers, and then not a single server is deployed yet. That's not to say that they won't eventually do it. It's just, I'd rather see more building and less posturing.
Exactly.
Historically, that's what Amazon has been quite good at, is they just quietly get on with stuff, which was, I think, why we're feeling this is a little bit reactionary, because they have historically quietly gotten on with stuff, and then we saw all this big reactionary noise about the AI thing because they were caught a little bit flat-footed on that. So now anything where they talk about, well, we're doing this, feels reactionary, but I think that's just the news cycle.
Yeah. And I don't think it's necessarily them being the proponent of it, right? Like, these are reporters chasing stories and editors trying to report on things for the Capitol, for Wall Street. So it could be that, I haven't seen them making a big press release about it. I saw like a 2-paragraph one from Amazon, and it's still interesting. And, like, if you remember Microsoft, when they did that underwater data center off the coast of Finland or something, they made a giant deal out of
It was in the Orkneys. It's up in Scotland.
Yeah.
Scotland.
That's where it was. And and I mean, that's not even used anymore. So it's like, do you want to talk about it or do you want to build it?
I mean, to be fair to Microsoft, that was a test. That was a multi-year test, because it was a data center that was the size of one shipping container. So it was a test, and it was really cool. But
It was
cool. There was a lot of noise about it and a lot of fanfare, and it's just a test. Okay, testing is cool, and we like this, and we like alternate cooling solutions, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But there was a lot of noise. So,
well, perhaps if they didn't anchor it correctly, it could have ended up in Finland with ocean currents.
The Orkneys are a funny old place, because Scotland's a funny old place as well. You go far enough north into Scotland and you're basically in Scandinavia.
Pretty much. Yeah, pretty much. On that note, let's move along to our final article for this week. And John, you alluded to it, and Randall, you were talking about servers. So this is kind of server related, but not quite. This is an announcement last week about how AWS is cooling the next generation AI data centers with new liquid cooling technology. So I think liquid cooling technology has been around in data centers for quite a while, but I don't think it's been mass adopted due to the cost and complexity of rolling it out. But, we are seeing some pretty powerful racks. I think the NVIDIA racks are now drawing something like 120 kilowatts per rack, which is crazy, because when I was in the data center game, a 2 kilowatt rack was about all you could get in London, and you could put like 3 servers in it and just lots of space and air and blanking plates. But this is an article about some liquid cooling technology that AWS are rolling out into their data centers. And John, I know you were geeking out about this when it was posted last week. So what are your thoughts on this one?
Okay, so context. I don't have any experience in running data centers or building servers, but I'm a big PC gamer, and there's this massive community. Well, massive. There's a noisy community of nerds that argue about how to cool your PCs, and the 3 sort of main types of doing it is air cooled, and I'm a fan of air cooled because it don't break. You've just got a whacking great heatsink and some fans, and if your fans break, you put a new one in. Easy peasy. Then you've got liquid cooling, and that's broken down into 2 sort of subtypes, and that's AIOs, which is all-in-ones, which again is big cold plate, rad, fans, cool. That's okay because you don't have lots of exposed pipes and wires and things, but if your pump dies, your CPU cooks itself. Not good. And then you've got the custom loop people, who are massive nerds, and they will argue about soft versus hardline tubing and their reservoirs and all sorts. And then you can liquid cool GPUs. Right. So I nerded out about this quite a lot because I like that sort of world. As you say, in the server space, it's been available that you could liquid cool PCs, liquid cool servers, but it's not been, as far as I know, hugely common because it's quite tricky, and it's really tricky in like blade servers that are really, really skinny. So what they would tend to do, as far as I understand it, is you'd have big heat sinks with big fins on them, fans at the front, blow a load of air over the whole thing. And because they're little, they sound like they're basically trying to take off. You turn them on, they all purge, and they just make this big, ugly whirring noise. And if we did any editing, I'd insert it in the podcast here, but we don't, so you're going to be spared of that. And they'd turn on and they'd make this horrible noise, and then everything would kind of blow air through and it would all cool down. Brilliant. Looking at the article, what Amazon appear to have done, and I was nerding out about the manifolds for crying out loud, is they appear to have done it per rack, which is really, really cool. And some of the pictures they're showing, they've got these whacking great lumps of copper. They're heat pipes, if you're unfamiliar, which they're sort of full of liquid. It's liquid and wicks, and they use capillary reaction to kind of move heat around really, really fast, which again, they're scary how quick they are, to the extent that even air-cooled PCs, certainly in the desktop space, inside their heat sinks, they will have heat pipes to move heat up and down real quick. So there's a lump of those, and it appears that what they're doing is they're then going out to a heat exchanger at the rack level, and then you see these enormous great pipes which are full of hot and cool water, and they're whacking great manifolds, and presumably they're doing some sort of central dump, because eventually you do still need to air cool these things, right? Because unless you have some sort of liquid to liquid heat exchanger, you need air to get rid of this heat somewhere. And they don't talk about how they're doing the central dumps and the dissipations, but you've seen this before, right? You've seen this before where you could have not a closed loop water system, it was an open loop, and you use the heated water further down the chain. This is closed loop, which is kind of more traditional for liquid cooling, I think, which means that there is going to be an air cooled system somewhere. It'll just be in the HVAC system. But yeah, I was properly nerding out about this. It's well worth reading this if you're even vaguely interested in this sort of thing. And to be fair to Amazon as well, this is a really low-level article. I nerded out about it because I understand the context and the ecosystem, but they do sort of talk about, well, air is easy, water is harder, but it's 900 times denser. It can take much more thermal mass and all this kind of jazz. And I don't think they're using water. They'll be using something closer to antifreeze effectively. But yeah, I was properly excited about this.
What about yourself, Randall?
Yeah, I like that it doesn't increase their water consumption. I read the article, but I missed that the first time. So the closed loop system, I mean, there must be some entropy always wins, right? Like the thermodynamics is physics doesn't bend. It just you pay the heat tax at some point. So I think they are probably having some increased water consumption, but probably very little, and that's a nice thing. And then one thing that wasn't clear to me on the first run read through this is that they can kind of pick and choose, and you mentioned this, John, which rack it goes to. So you can still have air cooled racks interleaved with the water cooled ones if you want, which gives them a lot of flexibility for kind of moving stuff around. And if you think about the liquid cooling being necessary for some of the GPU workloads, then maybe the reason for this this custom unit and this custom implementation is so that they can more densely pack some of these GPUs in the real estate constrained areas. Because I mean, at the end of the day, right, AWS is a first level abstraction over real estate, silicon, and power consumption, and that's what they're trying to optimize for. And I think if you think about the cloud and you think about all the incentives and how they're aligned, like this is driving towards all the right things. All the incentives are aligned correctly because they make more margin if they're able to put more compute more densely with less power and less energy. And we contribute less to environmental issues if we leverage that more densely packed compute rather than everyone like replicating a whole bunch of stuff. There's a lot of scale. I remember James Hamilton back in the day said that they never built data centers over 100 megawatts because of various failure modes that take off after that point. And yeah, I think it's an interesting evolution because AWS often sort of railed against liquid cooling in the past and said it was unnecessary for 90% of workloads. And it's interesting to see that evolution.
They're not wrong, is the thing. Yeah. And this is okay. My context is a little bit different because, as I say, PC gamer. So it's rather, I'm not running megawatt racks. My thing down there is about 800 watts or something. So it's not quite a kilowatt. But almost everything in the consumer space starts air cooled because air doesn't break. You don't need a pump. And yeah, okay, your fans can break, but fans are pence, right? They're really cheap things to replace. And with modern kind of CPU thermal throttling and what have you, so long as it's got a decent sized heatsink on it, it will tell you that there's a problem before it cooks itself. With your water cooled based approaches, you have to turn all those things off because it can't understand that. So if your pump dies, you're stuffed. So yeah, AWS are not wrong, and Amazon are not wrong that for the vast majority of use cases, air cooling is sufficient, because it just generally is, right? And if you think about things that aren't compute intensive, think NAS instances, for instance. We know where all that EFS storage is put. Yes, there'll be one dirty great unit of compute along the top of it to handle all of that IO, but disks don't generate vast amounts of heat by themselves. Okay, yes, don't at me in the comments about M2 drives needing heat sinks. I know, but spinning rust don't generate huge amounts of heat. So air cooling for most things is enough. But yeah, I know I'm never going to get to do it, but I'd love to go walk around one of these data centers and just properly nerd out.
I'm really curious how hard it is going to be for them to retrofit the existing racks, or if you have to do a whole new rack. That was something I didn't find in the article, but I think would be very cool to know.
I would imagine it's new racks for this. I would imagine the racks themselves are quite specialized, and it will be, but they're building out. I mean, we've just spoken about how much data center space is going to be built or invested in the various areas. So, I'm not sure whether retrofitting is going to be a major concern. I guess it's going to be the new workloads in the new data centers that are going to benefit from this, and then maybe shifting the data and the workloads into those new environments. But you mentioned, Randall, that AWS are kind of sort of negative about liquid cooling in the past, but things are moving on so quickly, and the workloads that this is being designed for probably didn't exist when they had those opinions. So it's the world is rapidly evolving. I used to love doing data center tours, by the way. I'd love to go around an AWS data center. I don't know who you need to sweet talk to make that happen. I know they are quite secret facilities, but I'd love to. I know you can go around the fulfillment centers. Certainly, they were doing chargeable tours of fulfillment centers, which would also be pretty cool to go in and see all the robots.
I've been around a fulfillment center, but it was a Debenhams one 20 years ago, so it's not going to be that interesting.
Probably not quite as impressive as an Amazon.
I mean, as a teenager, that was very impressive. Big forklifts going around at silly speeds, but yeah.
They're pretty strict about the data centers, but if you want to see some example racks, you can go to the Executive Briefing Center in Seattle, but they also have the one in New York, and they have the racks. They've got the Nitro top of rack switches, everything, and you can kind of look around. You can see all the fiber. It's a nice setup. And then at reInvent, they show off some of it as well.
Well, in the Peter DeSantis tour, or actually in the
real hardware in the exhibition hall. Yeah. So if you go over
the
same
as going in the, it's not the same as going in the data center, though, is it? And seeing it at scale, it's nice to see the kit, but it's to see it at scale.
Just walk over this anti-static mat. In you go. Stick.
Anyway, before we geek out too much more on this, we have come to the end of our time for season 4, episode 24 of Logicast. So just remains for me to thank you, Randall, for giving up your time to come and share your insights. It's been great to meet you and have you on the podcast. And thank you, John, as always, for sharing your insights on this episode. If you are still listening and you enjoyed it, please do tell your friends. We are available to download from wherever you download your podcasts. And if you'd like to see the funny faces we're pulling when we're talking to you, we're also streaming on our YouTube channel. So as I said, that's all we have time for season 4, episode 24. We'll be back next week with another episode of Logicast for you. In the meantime, thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next time.
Thanks for having me.